The year was 1944. Base. Kilo Victor was a secret station hidden on a volcanic peak in the northern Pacific. It wasn't an airbase or a supply depot. It was a listening post. The men who lived there were chosen for their patience, their ears, and their ability to keep secrets. The island was a jagged tooth of black rock rising out of a freezing, churning sea, perpetually wrapped in a veil of cold gray mist. Corporal Julian Seife Vance was a cryptographer. His world was not one of bullets and bayonets, but of numbers, patterns, and the haunting melody of Japanese Morse code. He spent 18 hours a day in a soundproof bunker buried deep inside the volcanic rock, listening to the blue vault, the vast, invisible expanse of enemy radio waves. The war of the mind life at Kilo Victor was a psychological grind. Because the base was a secret, there were no movies, no USO shows, and no mail for months at a time. The men lived in a state of hyperfocus. The only sound was the hum of the cooling fans and the rhythmic drip-drip of condensation hitting the concrete floor. "Do you ever feel like you're losing your mind, Seife?" asked Leo, the youngest operator, as he rubbed his bloodshot eyes. "All these dots and dashes, they start to look like ants crawling on the page." Julian adjusted his headset. "The ants are telling a story, Leo. If we miss a single word, 1,000 men on a carrier 300 miles away might not wake up tomorrow. You don't listen with your ears. You listen with your soul." The ghost frequency. One freezing Tuesday, a massive atmospheric storm, a magnetic ghost, swept across the Pacific. It scrambled every radio frequency, filling the airwaves with a roar like 1,000 lions. Most of the operators gave up, their screens filled with nothing but chaotic static. But Julian stayed. He tuned his dials to a forbidden frequency, a low-band channel that was usually empty. Suddenly, through the wall of white noise, he heard it. It was faint, like a heartbeat under a frozen lake. It wasn't the standard military code. It was a black code, a top-secret frequency used only by the Japanese High Command for coordinated strikes. The race in the dark. The base commander burst into the room. "The fleet is moving toward Lady Gulf. We need to know their coordinates, Vance." "The admiral is flying blind." Julian closed his eyes. The static was deafening, a physical pain in his ears. He began to hum a low tune, a trick he used to cancel out the external noise. He focused solely on the microscopic variations in the pitch of the static. "I have the first 2 digits, Julian whispered, his hand flying across his notepad. "But the third is buried under a solar flare." Suddenly, the power in the bunker flickered. The storm had knocked out the main transformer on the cliffside. The emergency lights turned a dim, ghostly red. The radio signal began to fade. Julian knew that if he lost the frequency now, he would never find it again in the chaos of the storm. He didn't wait for the engineers. He crawled behind the massive radio rack, into a space filled with high-voltage wires and searing heat. He found the cracked vacuum tube that was failing. He couldn't replace it. They had no spares. So he took his heavy wool sweater, soaked it in a bucket of cooling water, and wrapped it around the glass tube to keep it from shattering under the heat. Holding the wet cloth in place with his bare hands, he shouted to Leo, "Read the dials." Now, the last digit, the heat from the tube was blistering Julian's palms, and the electrical hum made his teeth ache, but the signal stabilized. 127. Bearing 127. Leo screamed. Julian held the connection for 3 more minutes, his body shaking from the strain and the heat, until the entire message was decoded. It was the location of a Japanese carrier group waiting in ambush. He let go, the vacuum tube finally popping with a sharp crack. Julian slumped against the rack, his hands red and raw, the silence of the bunker finally returning. The silent victory. 6 hours later, a message came back from the fleet admiral. It was only 3 words. Ambush thwarted. Thanks. There were no medals given out at Base Kilo Victor. There were no news reports about the corporal who burned his hands to save a fleet. The next morning, Julian was back at his desk, his hands bandaged, his headset on, listening to the static once again. As the sun struggled to break through the Aleutian fog, Julian looked at the young operator, Leo. "Hear that, kid?" Leo listened intently. "It's just the wind, Syph." Julian smiled, a tired but peaceful look in his eyes. "No, that's the sound of 1,000 men who get to have breakfast today. That's the best music in the world." The war eventually ended, and the black rocks of Kilo Victor were left to the seabirds. But the silence of the Blue Vault was never truly empty. It carried the legacy of the men who fought a war of numbers and noise, proving that sometimes the most important battles are won without a single shot being fired.